The article that I have chosen for article assignment number 2 is called Angie Thomas, the debut novelist who turned racism and police violence into a bestseller. And this is a profile that was written about Angie Thomas from The Guardian, and it is written by Afua Hirsch. I'm actually going to be reading the article to you. I'm going to try my best. Sometimes I'm going to stumble a little bit. But as I'm reading this article, please read along at the same time on the PDF file that I have given you on e-learning. So the PDF file for the article and the PDF file for the questions are both going to be on e-learning, and it's going to be under the different reading assignments, under article number 2, article assignment number 2. So I'm going to start reading. Angie Thomas, the debut novelist who turned racism and police violence into a bestseller. Afua Hirsch. Angie Thomas grew up witnessing drug dealing and gun crime, but dreamed of being a writer. Then police shot a young, unarmed black man, and she found her subject. Afua Hirsch meets her. Sunday, 26 March 2017. If a spaceship landed in northern Texas and beamed every adolescent within a 15-mile radius into its desolate interior, the scene would look a lot like what it now lies in front of me. It's difficult to believe there are any teenagers in North Texas not currently forming orderly queues at the Las Colinas Conference Center, a formidably angular set of slabs in the Texan wasteland. Yet among the lines of young readers at the North Texan Teen Books Festival, their arms cradling impractical numbers of books, and the rows of authors signing on an industrial scale, one woman stands out. Angie Thomas, one of the youngest writers in the place, is one black face in a sea of white. She is upbeat, her hair tied with a perky bow, and when a fan says she looks so pretty, in a top that combines a hood with a sheer lace panels, she laughs and says, "Thank you," in a Mississippi accent whose vowels are so many notes, it's a beguiling song. She fingers the garment. My friend called it thug life with a feminine twist. However you interpret that description, it will mean something different after reading Thomas's book, the recently released The Hate You Give. She's a 29-year-old woman from Jackson who has written a novel that is a strident and utterly compelling march into the most sensitive and contentious subject in America today: race, privilege, and the killings of unarmed black people at the hands of police. And she has done so for the young adult fiction scene, the popular YA genre, still best known for Harry Potter and the Twilight trilogy. Among these overwhelmingly white adolescents in suburban Texas, the book is completely sold out and will, a few days later, debut at number 1 at the New York Times bestseller list. It's a publishing miracle. So backing up for a moment, YA means young adult. So this is actually a genre of fiction. When you walk into a bookstore, you'll actually see young adult fiction as its own section in the bookstore. The Hate You Give tells the story of Star, a 16-year-old black girl who lives in the inner city America in a neighborhood that is poor and black, but goes to school in a suburb that is affluent and white. At home, Star's loving and protective parents usher their children into a room they call the den, not just to watch basketball games, but to shield them from the machine gun fire that frequently erupts on the street outside. One night, Star and her childhood friend Khalil are driving home from a party when they are pulled over by police. Khalil, who is unarmed, is made to get out of the vehicle, and an officer, who later claims he mistook the boy's hairbrush for a gun, shoots and kills him, traumatizing Star. It's a story based in many ways on Thomas's own childhood, growing up poor in the predominantly black Georgetown neighborhood of Jackson, Mississippi. When I was 6, I was at the park, and 2 drug dealers decided to recreate the Wild West with a shootout, Thomas recalls. I ended up running out of the crossfire, and, the very next day, my mom took me to the library, because she wanted me to see that there was more to the world than what I saw that day. That incident gave birth to Thomas's career as a writer. She wrote her first story, a piece of Mickey Mouse fan fiction, the same year. The story of Star and Khalil was born more than a decade later when Thomas, who still lives in the same Georgetown neighborhood, was in her senior year at the majority-white university in Jackson. In 2009, news broke out that a 22-year-old unarmed black man, Oscar Grant, had been detained and then shot in the back by police in California. Both the killings, which sparked protests at the time, but also the narrative around it, angered Thomas deeply. One thing that stood out about Oscar was the way people talked about his past, Thomas explained. At school, people were talking about what he had done, that he may have deserved it, that he may have been in the wrong, but Oscar could have been any of the young men I get up with, who were maybe doing things they shouldn't have been doing. They are all seen as thugs. They are put on trial sometimes for their own death. The Hate U Give follows Star first as shocked and bereaved friend, then the naive and cooperative witness whose faith in the fairness of the process is cruelly betrayed. Finally, the 16-year-old evolves into a radicalized young black woman, keenly aware of the injustice of a system that regards the lives of poor black people as worth less than the white officers who appear to shoot them with impunity. It's a story Thomas feels it was imperative for the YA genre to grasp. So many teenagers are affected by these cases. It's usually young, unarmed black people who lose their lives, she says, recalling the litany of the police killings that galvanized the Black Lives Matter movement. Trayvon Martin was 17. Mike Brown was young. Tamir Rice was 12. And so young people are affected by it, possibly the most affected, because they are seeing themselves. Even though The Hate U Give began as a short story in 2009, it was these deaths that inspired her, in 2015, to return to the subject and write a novel. At the time, she was secretary to a bishop in Mississippi. "I wrote while I was working," Thomas explained, adding apologetically, "Yeah, all those curse words were written in a church." Previous attempts at getting her work published had come to nothing. A children's book she wrote was met with 60 rejections by literary agents. But this time, things were different. Thomas contacted a nonprofit organization, We Need Diverse Books, set up to do exactly what its name implies. Thomas submitted her work for the organization's inaugural awards and won. It was a nice amount of money, enough for me to buy a new laptop. My laptop at the time was held together with tape, Thomas laughs. And having a panel of judges like that, every single judge is big in the publishing industry. Having them say this is good was reassuring. Thomas supports the organization, sharing their mission as well as mentoring young black people in Jackson and providing one-on-one support for those interested in writing. When she was young, Thomas felt a lack of black authors keenly. So although she hopes the book has universal appeal, nothing about it is watered down. Even the title is provocative, taken from the interviews with the late rapper Tupac Shakur, who once said Thug Life, the name of his group and the only studio album, stood for the phrase, "The hate you give little infants fucks everyone." Thomas, who dabbled in hip-hop herself, is a Tupac devotee. She also loves Jordan sneakers, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Harry Potter. And all these cultural references comes to form, unsurprisingly, a unique kind of social commentary. I wanted to make sure that I gave Star's story as authentically as possible. And this is probably going to sound odd, but I looked at Harry Potter. One of the things J.K. Rowling does beautifully is that every person in Harry's life, no matter their role, you can tell they are the main character of their own story. The commitment to authentic characters of all backgrounds has already been picked up by the reviews of The Hate U Give. But it's Thomas's Harry Potter gang theory that seems to have most awed fans at this Dallas book fair. The Hogwarts houses are really gangs, Thomas says. They have their own colors, their own hideouts, and they're always riding for each other like gangs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione never snitch on each other, just like gangbangers. Death Eaters even have matching tattoos. And look at Voldemort. They're scared to say his name. Really, that he who must not be named stuff is like giving him a street name. That's some gangbanging right there. She laughs. Tupac once said the biggest gangs in America were the politicians, Democrats and Republicans. They take the same approach from some of these gangbangers take. It's interesting how it's only gangbanging, though, that's seen such a negative light. These references are a device that Thomas uses to create empathy toward her characters, current and former gang members and drug dealers among them. But in doing so, she also lures in readers who would probably never otherwise encounter a sophisticated conversation about Black identities and Black consciousness. Star, shuttling between a poor Black world at home and a privileged white world at school, is constantly code switching, changing her speech and behavior in an attempt to avoid being the token ghetto Black girl, or another powerful stereotype, the angry Black woman. I think a lot of African Americans can understand that, she said. Especially if you're put into a lot of white spaces, like me today. She gestures at the conference hall around her. You have to figure out who you are and where you are. It's an interesting time to be conducting a discussion of Blackness on such a high-profile literary stage. Thomas does not mince her words about the impact of President Trump, and singles out his attacks on the assertion of Black identities in particular, such as his criticisms of the Black comedy show Blackish, which he denounced on Twitter as racism at its highest level. So often Blackness is seen in a negative light, she laments. The Black Lives Matter movement, which so often attracts the retort that all lives matter, has been conspicuously less high profile since Trump's election. But to Thomas, who is a passionate supporter of the movement, although not formally affiliated to the Black Lives Matter organization, that's a question of evolution. A lot of people involved in Black Lives Matter movement are actually sticking up for those other lives. They are turning out for their Muslim brothers and sisters, who are now being targeted. And where are all you, all lives matter people now? We are on the front line. We are sticking up for them, she says. It's funny how much unity there is since this election. Thomas says that when Trump was elected, she cried for 20 minutes before it occurred to her that a new unity would follow, and that the oppression and injustice she had always perceived would now be more visible to everyone else in America. The discomfort that everybody is feeling, I feel that I have always felt it. So it's interesting to see people, radicalized. They are energized. The attempt at division has actually made a lot of us come together, closer. It may be anecdotal, but here in Texas, a state so conservative that the most contentious political debate is not over whether to stop using the death penalty, but whether to restrict its use on the severely mentally ill. Thomas has hit a nerve. An endless stream of white teenagers, unable to get their hands on the now sold-out book, ask her to sign bookmarks, cloth book bags, even Post-it notes. I just think that this book is empowering, says one 15-year-old fan named Megan, who has yet to read it, but has heard about it on Tumblr. Like I've really never seen anything like it. They smile at each other. This 15-year-old from the Dallas suburbs, with freckles and two wavy bunches, and Thomas, the Black activist author, with her thug life fashion and Jordan 11s, with red velvet trim. Then Thomas turns to me, a dreamy look in her eyes, and says, "Isn't this amazing?"